Good morning. I wasn't just standing here, I was ready to speak. My name is Lorraine Jacobs. I'm co-chair of the Sunday Morning Forum group with Mark, who's the technician. And we are so glad that you're here today and joining us because I too wanted to meet James Causey in person. And so this is a great chance. One point of business is that there will be a basket on a little table near the door before you leave if you would like to put some money in to help with our expenses here at the forum. So that would be great. And I would like to introduce our welcome our presenter's wife, who's going to introduce our speaker today. And so Damia will be here. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
As stated, I'm Damia Causey. I have the privilege of being married to James Causey, my husband. James, as many of you know, is a journalist, and he will tell anybody he's had 2 jobs in his life. He was a busboy at Sizzler Steakhouse, and and he's been at the paper since he was 15 years old after a writing contest. So he's been a journalist now, serving the city of Milwaukee and its residents for over 30 years. Wow. So he's very committed to the community. Like I said, most of you know that James is as a columnist, as a writer, as a man about town, but he also loves 1/18 scale cars. He likes Schwinn bicycles, retro video game systems, and things like that. So when he's not serving the community in that capacity, that's how he likes to decompress. And so I bring to you James Causey.
Thanks for having me come speak today. While my wife was talking, I was busy trying to get this Schwinn bike in Chicago, but my wife would be the first to tell you I have too many bikes right now, but we're going to get started. So before I came up with a topic for today, I really came up with the topic within the last couple of days, right? There's so many things to talk about when it comes to journalism. And one thing that has struck me a lot of late is really how the media operates and how much control the media has over a lot of things that we do, and then how it has influence over our lives. So I want everybody to, for a second, close your eyes. Close your eyes. Everybody, close your eyes. I see some of you still looking at me. But I want you to close your eyes, and I just want you to, by a show of hands, I'm gonna ask you a few questions, and I want you to raise your hand if you think this applies, okay? How many of you believe that the media is biased? Biased. Okay. Hands down. How many of you believe, have you ever judged another race based on what you saw broadcast in news or read in the newspaper? Yes. Have you ever judged another race based on what you saw on television news or that you read in the newspaper? By a show of hands. Okay, hands down. And that's why I told everybody to close their eyes, because I just want to get a sense, but some of you are still looking at me. The last question, how many of you believe that the media overall is racist? By a show of hands. Okay, hands down. So I just want to get a quick sense. For people who believe that the media is biased, I just want to hear some responses. Anybody want to volunteer and tell me why they believe the media is biased? The guy in the back. Okay. All right. Anyone else? Yes.
Media is such a wide on the much more
Right. So what was said, just I'm repeating for the people who are watching virtually, is that there's such a wide range of media that, of course, there's going to be some views that skew to be biased. Anyone who agrees or believes that the media has shaped their view of minorities in any way, shape, or form, who wants to talk about that? I've seen some hands go up. Anyone? Yes, sir, in the back.
Information taking their whole life for them to opinion. I like to think I thought it out, but I'm sure part of everything is my brain, my memory, and everything is affected by the collective that it's going to hold. Actually promoted or not aware of how much it is.
Right. Okay. Anyone else? There's no wrong or right answers, by the way. Yes, sir. I'm glad you said that. So what was said is I don't actually watch those programs that really depict or the news that depicts African Americans or Hispanics in a certain light. How many people in a green shirt in the back? Yes. Yes. I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm a member of the. Can I speak louder? Okay. Yeah. Okay. The question was, do you believe, can you hear me now? Okay. This is the room speaker. Can I? See, I don't want to, I let somebody else do that part. I'll just do this. How about that? Is this one? I'll talk like this the rest of the So the question, the woman in the back of the room in a green sweater suggested or said that she thought about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in different light after you heard from someone from the Palestinian side. So I would like to tell you, I'm a member of the Journal Sentinel editorial board and have been since 2008. And just last week, we actually had a group of Palestinians leaders come into our newsroom and meet with members of the editorial board and tell us that they believe that our coverage, not just our coverage, but media's coverage of the conflict is biased. They said that we're only getting one side of the story. We're only telling us, and that side controls the media outlets over there. And so it just gave us a different way of looking at things, and we have to do a better job. The last question, how many of you believe the media is really racist? Just overall, do you think there's a form of or a tinge of racism in media coverage? Okay. Okay. I want to go back to the young lady in the back with the green sweater. You had your hand up. Why do you say that the media is racist? Okay. So for the people watching virtually, the response was that everything pretty much has a tinge of racism in it to a certain degree. So the media is not excluded from that, even though we try to be, some of us try to be, but it's almost impossible to get away from it. In the front, you. Right. So the response was that the media pits us against one another and it's not unified. I think these are all well-stated responses to what some of the problems are with media. And I'm a part of media. I try to do my part. I try to be respectful. I try to show both sides, but you know, sometimes you're influenced by what you see, read, hear, what you live, and all those other things. Yes, in the red. So I will repeat that. One way to trust media is they considers people's humanity, right? Is that I'm trying to sum it up as best I can. Protecting their humanity. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. So again, for people at home, what's your name? I'm sorry. Juliet said that she rarely sees Native Americans interviewed by the media. I do too, and Asians. I do too. I mean, I think that's a class or a race of people that we don't do a good job on covering. We don't do a good job on telling their stories. One thing that I do, so I'm going to give you a little background on myself so you understand what I try to do. I'm also a USC fellow, senior fellow. And what I do, I help other journalists across the country work on their projects. In USC Annenberg in California, they have a journalism program where we work with a journalist who work with communities like Native Americans, like Asians, and try to tell some of the aspects of their lives. And I edit those projects and I give a lot of coaching to those reporters so they could get these kind of stories told. But I'm going to move on. I just kind of want to get a sense, but I basically wanted to tell you, you're all right. The media is biased. It's very biased. Some more biased than others. The media is very racist, some more than others. And the media does shape the views of how you view other people. It's a reason why when you go to people who never met an African American before already have these set ideas of who they are. It's, you know, how can you hate somebody you never met? You know, but that happens all the time. And this is just some fun facts that I pulled up. Do you know that the average person, I consider most of you average people, average citizens, spend 7.5 hours a day with the media? 7.5 hours. That's a lot of consumption. So what that comes down to, 52 and a half hours a week, right? Now, let's go back for a second. Most of you said that the media is racist. Most of you said that the media is biased. Most of you, I assume, watch media that you trust. So you're consuming 52 and a half hours of racist, biased medium every week. What that comes down is to 2,730 hours a year.
That's more than most people work.
Good point. Hey, he stole my PowerPoint. So what my next lines were was, that's more time that we spend with that's more time that children spend in school. That's more time than most of us spend at work. That's more time than most of us spend with our family and friends, children and spouses. And that's more time than most of us spend in church. I had to throw that one in there. I'm sorry. It's true though. It's true. That's because the media is always there. So, going back to this question again, is the media biased? Is it racist? Does it influence? The answer is yes, it does. And the purpose is to influence. The purpose is to have control. And that's what it's all about, right? Okay. But I got to tell you this. I love journalism. I love what I do, even though I'm influencing you all the time. But I don't make any bones about it. I'm an opinion writer. So my job is to influence. I try to shape your ideas and things like that. I don't hide it. Most people do hide it. But let's just go back. So I love journalism. And I first fell in love with journalism. Like my wife said, I only had 2 jobs in my life. I worked as a busboy at Sizzler Steakhouse, and I bussed tables and I washed dishes and I did all those kind of things. And but let's go back to when I was in 7th grade. I was a student at Jackie Robinson Middle School. And when I was at Jackie Robinson, they had a citywide contest on Martin Luther King Jr., of course. And the question was like, has Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech been realized? Has it come true? And so, I know a lot of people, a lot of kids, they did their they came up with their own stories. But what I did at the time when I was in 7th grade, I pretended like I was a reporter at the time, and I interviewed Martin Luther King Jr., right? So I did my story that way, and I won first place. At the time, I received a $50 stipend, and my story appeared in the Milwaukee Community Journal, which is the state's largest African-American newspaper. So just think about it. 7th grade, you get a $50 check, and your story appears in the largest African-American newspaper in the state. I said, I don't want to be a professional boxer anymore. I want to be a journalist. So right after that, I decided, that really set the tone for the rest of my life, because after I won the contest, my homeroom teacher, Miss Campbell, said, James, what are you going to do after you finish middle school? And I don't know, I guess I'll go to tech or something like that, Milwaukee Tech. Maybe I'll work on cars. And she's like, you're not going to do that. You don't do that. Why don't you go to John Marshall High School? They have a journalism and broadcasting specialty, and I think you would be very, very good at that. I'm like, hey, that's what I'm going to do. So sometimes it takes one teacher. The importance of teachers is so important to your lives. If you know a teacher, tell a teacher that you love a teacher, because they influence so much. It's because of her that I went to John Marshall High School. In my sophomore year at John Marshall High School, the Milwaukee Sentinel, a lot of you may remember this, we had a morning paper, the Milwaukee Sentinel, and an evening paper, the Milwaukee Journal. How many of you remember that? Okay. Oh, whoa. Hey, that's good. All right. So I worked, the Milwaukee Sentinel had always had college interns. And just like the Journal always had college interns, but the Sentinel wanted to always beat the Journal, right? So they said, hey, what if we go younger? What if we have a high school intern? And they were like, oh, that's a great idea. So they had a little contest, and a lot of people applied to be a high school intern, and I applied. And they had us write a little short essay and show any clips that we had. And of course, I showed my clip that I won on the Martin Luther King Jr. essay contest. And when I went in for my interview, I had my little suspenders on and my bow tie and my briefcase, and they said, Jerry Hinckley, who was an editor at the time, she said, I love you. We're going to pick you. And so they picked me, and the rest is really history. I started working at the paper at 15 years old, right? And I've been there ever since. So I love what I do. So after King gave his fantastic speech, and I know we've all heard it plenty of times. Just 5 years after his speech, the Kerner Commission report was released. And it really talked about a lot of problems that we have in our country. And a lot of you remember this. They warned us that our nation was moving towards two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. You remember that? Anybody remember? Yeah. The report criticized the news media as well for hiring few black journalists and editors and urged the industry to take action to fix this problem, right? They criticized the media for for failing to report adequate information on the causes and consequences of the civil disorders and underlying problems of race relations in this country. And they noted that far too often the press acts and talks about Negroes as if Negroes did not read the newspaper, watch television, give birth, marry, die, or go to PTA meetings. And that failing to portray the Negro as a matter of routine and in the context of total society, the report noted that the news media have, we believe, contributed to the black-white problems in this country, basically. So think about that. Back then in 1968, a report came out saying that the media is part of the problem. You guys don't report accurately on what's going on in black and brown communities all across this country. Your media coverage is racist. That's real. Bottom line, that's what the report said. You don't hire black people. You try to tell stories on civil rights, and you don't even have anybody representing the other side. That sounds familiar. So a half a century later, have things improved? This is 1990, the Milwaukee Sentinel newsroom. What do you not see in this picture? The funny part is I know most of these people. See if I can find Jerry Hinckley, the lady we hired. This is one of the things. Right in the middle. I love Jerry. She really took time with me, and she really wanted to make sure that I became the best journalist I could be. Even though she, no matter what, no matter how old I got, she still treated me like I was 15 years old. I mean, I'm 30 something years old, and she's like, James, are you sure you can handle that? Jerry, I'm 35. I'm pretty sure I can handle it. Next slide, please. This is 2016. It doesn't look much different, does it? I mean, there's Angela Peterson, a great photographer, photojournalist at the bottom of the screen. David Davis up near the top. Jill Williams and her husband is somewhere in there. But honestly, the newsroom still looks white. It's very white. It's older. It was older until we started having all these buyouts. But now we got rid of all the older people and hired all these young people that we pay hardly nothing to. So, but it's not just our newsroom. And the reason I picked 2016, that was the last time we took a group photo. The Washington Post, 2022, looks the same. Go back one time, please. Okay, Chicago Tribune. Look at that newsroom. Yep. So what we're seeing is there's a lot of newspapers across this country that have zero people of color, zero women, zero this, zero that. This is just an example of what we see. And I bring this up because the Kerner Commission report could have probably been written today and it would show the same things. So basically, we still lack a lot of journalists of color in our newsroom. And as a result, the trust of journalists is nearly at an all-time low. One of the main things that I run across when I go out into the community is that, the lack of trust. They don't trust us. How can you trust people who honestly don't look like you. And every time that they report on you, crime on the north side, shooting here on the north side, videos of Black people committing crimes all the time. And these videos are not just shown in Milwaukee, they're shown all across the country, all across the world. Over and over again, you're taking in 7.5 hours of this every day, 52.5 hours of this every week, 2,730 hours of this every year, nonstop, and it never stops. So how do you think this is not influencing you? It is. If you hear that Black people are always committing crimes, Hispanics are always illegal and all this, you hear this over and over and over and over again. And it's shown in Milwaukee, Nashville, Cleveland, Detroit, China, Africa, because these broadcasts go all over the world. Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you get it? It's hilarious because it happens all the time. All the time. Whew. I mean, if that doesn't shake you to the bone, I mean, I don't know what else I could say that that will. So in 2023, I could tell you in my 30 plus years as a journalist, when I'm out in the community, I often hear the news is too negative. Why do you often portray Blacks as criminals? Why don't you tell more positive stories about Blacks and people of color? Why do you always interview the person that doesn't speak well or has the bag on their head or, just look like they committed the crime themselves? And when a Black man is arrested or dies in the custody, the first thing you want to do is bring up this person's criminal history. Hey, wait, think about the man who was killed for his selling loose cigarettes in, remember that? Eric Garner. The main thing that they brought up, not that he was choked out and that it was like 12 officers tackling him to the ground and all had their knees all in his chest and everything. The main thing that they brought up was his weight, that he had high blood pressure and all these other kind of things. Things that didn't kill him that day. What killed him that day was he was being choked out, right? I mean, let's be real. But those kind of things always come up. When a Black person gets killed by police, they bring up his mental history. Like, oh, this person had a mental health crisis. And we have a problem with mental health in this country. Or he was already a felon. Well, that mental health didn't kill that person. Those 16 shots to the chest killed that person. Even with George Floyd, we all saw how he was killed in front of us, how he begged for his life, how he, the last thing he said was like, mama. But they brought up his health history. His health history? Think about it. Just let that sink in for a second. There's a new study that just came out, and I'm just going to go over some of these points with you. It said Black Americans expressed broad concerns about how they were depicted in the news media, with a majority saying that they see racist or negative depictions of Blacks that covered broad segments of their community. 4 in 5 Black adults said that they see racist or racially insensitive depictions of their race in the news either often or sometimes, according to the Pew Research Center. Okay, again, if 40% of the Black people say that the news is racist, and you take in 7.5 hours of news a day, 52.5 hours of news a week, 2,730 hours of news a year, 40% of that, just 40%. Just think about 40% of those numbers. That's more than you get in education. That's more than the college educational systems are giving you if you go major in journalism. That has an impact on how you view the world, how you view other people, how you view your neighbor, how you view the person that's shopping at the same grocery store as you. Do you get that? Do you get how that impacts people? just 3 years after the killing of George Floyd, where we had this racial reckoning in the news, 63% of those who view the news said Black people are viewed more negative than any other racial group, where only 28% saying it was about equal. Black Americans are often depicted as perpetrators or victims of crime. There's no nuances in the coverage, according to Charles Whitaker, a dean at Medill Journalism School in Northwestern. Dean, just so you know, Medill is considered one of the top journalism schools in the country. And if you have the dean of one of the top journalism schools saying that Black Americans are often depicted as perpetrators or victims of crime, and there's no nuances in the coverage, that's the dean of a journalism school, one of the top journalism schools in the country. Come on, we got a problem, don't we? I just want to make sure that before you leave here today, you're going to say we have a problem in the media. I guarantee you. But I'm going to give you some tools. I'm going to leave you with some tools to do what you could do to address it. The attitudes reflected in the Pew study findings said that 57% of the respondents said that the media only covers specific segments of the Black community. You know what those segments are? Those segments are the people who depend on cops, like when the cops and people are working together, you know, they love those kind of stories. And they say, you know what they always say? They always say, police and the community are coming together to end violence. It's like, come on, y'all. We got to tell better stories. I go to this journalism convention every year called the National Association of Black Journalists. And it's comprised of roughly 3,000 journalists of color in the country. And we need this organization because of our small numbers. And at these conventions, that's me with one of my mentors, Richard Prince, who runs a journalism think tank. One thing that we try to do is like lift up journalists of color because we bear a lot of weight on our shoulders. There's a lot of things that we have to deal with that other journalists don't. And I got to tell you that I have a good piece coming out within the next 2 weeks I want you to read. I'm going to keep saying that because I want you to pick this paper up and make sure you share the story on race and some of the things that I've dealt with as a journalist over my career. But Richard Prince, the journalist right there, he said, Blacks and other people of color want to be portrayed as having the same concerns as everybody else in addition to hearing the news. So he's not saying he doesn't want to hear about news that impacts his community. He says, show some balance, you know, please show some balance. On September 29th, my wife and I, we watched a 10 p.m. broadcast on Fox News, local broadcast. And I got to tell you, the first 19 minutes was nothing but trauma. We were traumatized. I was actually laughing the whole time. My wife was traumatized because I was laughing because I was like, babe, watch these stories. These stories are going to be crazy. This is what Fox 6 led with. A police chase that reached speeds of 100 miles per hour. They had video of that. It was some young kids that the cops were chasing. A shooting at a downtown bar. That was the next story. A shooting of a Black person in another county that was more than an hour away from us, but they had this person picture mugshot, so they showed that. Came back to Wisconsin's Most Wanted, which was a Black man. Then they went back to another police chase in a whole nother state, but they had video of this Black person, so let's throw that in there too. We're going to give you all the bad Black people. We're going to make you hate Black people by the time this segment is over. And then when they came back with their positive news story, the one that said, okay, we gave you all this trauma, now we're going to try to fix it. We're going to have our hot shot category. And their hot shot where they feature a high school student, like a athlete of the week or something like that. They focused on this young white girl who twirls batons in her high school band. And I nearly fell off the bed laughing. My wife said, no, I'm writing them. I'm going to send them an email because this is crazy. And that weekend, it was so many positive stories that they could have went to. There was a Black author book fair. There was things going on at the Sherman Phoenix. There was a author showcase. There was a poet showcase. There was so many things going on positive that he could have shown us doing, but they didn't do that. And so, honey, can you come up here, please? I want you to share your story real quick on the letter that you wrote and the lack of response you got. I'm putting her on the spot.
Good morning again. Okay, so on that evening, we were watching the news, and I don't know why, I just felt like timing it this time. And so I literally sat and timed how long the news was going to be negative, like just how long. And it was a little bit over 19 minutes, and I couldn't believe it. And just think, the broadcast is 35 minutes with commercials. So I ended up sending Fox 6 News 3 emails. They still have not responded. I'm not going to stop emailing them. And I'm going to put it on my Facebook page and shame them into answering, because my question is, how do you choose what you show on the news? Like, how do you, pick your stories? And don't get me wrong, we all need to know what is happening, right? We all need to be aware and alert and all of those things. But when is it just, as you stated, when is it just sensational, right? Like, when is it just overkill, literally? Like, it's just so much. So there was just no balance. So that's.
Yes, sir.
Most of what you see in, I don't watch TV news. But what I see in the Journal Sentinel on a regular basis, page to page, bad news, bad news, bad news, bad news. There's not much uplifting.
Right. We're going to get into that. But think about this. There used to be a saying, if it bleeds, hey, some of you went to J school. If it bleeds, it leads. But what we know about trauma today, I don't know if that's the approach we should be taking. And I don't know how much that helps us. It's one thing to report that a kid was killed, right? And it was a tragic death. It's another thing to show mothers falling out in the street over their child's death. There's another thing to not offer any solutions to this problem. And that's the thing, is like, I think people are so frustrated because the news media has so much power, the power to offer solutions, the power to offer things to help, but no, they don't take that extra step. The thing that they want to do is traumatize you. And I honestly believe that, because these same images in that same 19-minute broadcast, while it was here in Milwaukee, I guarantee you it was a similar type broadcast of the same type of stories in Charlotte, in Houston, in LA, in Phoenix, all over this country. It happens every single day. And that's why you hear so many Black people say that they're tired and they don't watch the news anymore. Does that make sense? The picture of the man who was being choked while he was taking a mugshot, that's just one of many images, of hundreds of images that we could have used to show how Black people are often being depicted in the news. I'm going to stick with the Pew Research Center study, because the study just came out last month. And it said the news about Blacks in media is more damaging than the news about other racial groups. 44, so it even crosses political lines. 44% of Black Democrats, 46% of Black Republicans believe that the news coverage is full of stereotypes on African Americans. Many Blacks say Black journalists better understand the coverage of race-related issues. However, they know that when it comes down to the critical factor in determining the accuracy of the news in general, that sometimes stories get changed. And nearly 40% of those surveys said that the news is racist or racially insensitive. So, I could keep going on with all these statistics, but how do we fix it, right? I mean, we know that this exists. I just want to make sure we were all on the same playing field. We all know that this is a problem. So how do we fix it? That's the main thing, right? I want to hear some answers on how do we fix this? Anybody know how we could fix this problem? Yes, ma'am. Sorry. Yes, ma'am. In front. You. Yeah. More Black journalists. How many think that's a solution? That's part of the way we could fix it. Yes, sir. More Black management. That's another solution. In the back. Yes, sir. Yep. Exactly. And so for the people at home, it's like Black people need to own their radio and news stations and things like that so we could depict what's out there. And one thing, I'm glad you mentioned that, because a lot of we used to have more Black owned radio stations. We had 1290, we had these other stations, but those stations have gone by the wayside. I did a column a couple of years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, when I criticized how it wasn't really a criticism. I just said that, we need more Black radio stations here to get the message across. This was after the loss of 1290. And the conservative talk show radio hosts took offense to that. And they started calling me, said, you're a racist and you're. I was like, wait a second, you guys control most of the airwaves. You control most of it. I just said we need more, because if you look across this country since 1970 to today, we lost over half of our Black radio stations across this country. Over half. That's a good question. Why is that? I think it's a combination of a lot of reasons. I think that, it's tough on advertisers. Black people, in as far as money is concerned, you need to support those stations. And not just by listening to them, they have to have those advertising dollars come in. But I think honestly, I think most of this is done on purpose. They don't want those stations to exist, especially during a political season. No, get rid of that. We don't need that. That's just my opinion. I'm just being cynical today. Maybe it's because it's Sunday. But any other ways that we could fix it? Hire more people of color, hire more managers of color. Black people should own their own. In the back. All the way. Mm-hmm. Right. So for the people at home, we need to do more than just send one email. We need to picket these places. We need to question their hiring practices. We need to figure out what they're doing to hire journalists of color. What are they doing to put more people or managers of color in positions of power? What are they doing? And don't get me wrong, one hire here and there is fine, but I'm not seeing the change that we need to change what we see every day. 7.5 hours every single day of news that's considered racist. You can't make this up. Can you? Do you get this? It frustrates me. I mean, I've been on a tangent of late because it's unbelievable how much power, and we don't think about it because we absorb it all the time. We take in some of us take in more. Some of us take 8, 9, 10 hours of it. Can you imagine what they're like? So they end up like me. They end up like me. But let me go back. Everything that you said is correct. We need to hire more journalists of color, but we also need to not, when we hire those journalists of color, we need to make sure that these journalists of color are true journalists of color. Let me repeat that because I think that may have went over some people's head. When we hire journalists of color, we need to hire journalists of color. We've hired journalists of color. Let me put it this way. I don't want to single people out, but I've known journalists of color who've been hired at news organizations who didn't want to touch news, didn't want to cover people that look like them. They just like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do this. I don't want to do that. So you can hire journalists of color. That don't mean that they're going to all of a sudden change the trajectory of how and build up trust in a newsroom or trust in the community if they don't want to deal with that community. Does that make sense? So it's more than just hiring a journalist of color. It's more than putting a Black person in an editor's seat. It's like, if you're not living that life, if you're not in the trenches, then it doesn't make any difference. I mean, my wife and I, we stay on 39th and Capitol. We live right in the heart of the hood. I mean, we had bad neighbors. We deal with the reckless driving. We deal with all the craziness that comes in there. But you know what? In order to cover issues that you're passionate about, you have to be close to them. You can't be away from it. And I choose to live where we live because it's my parents' first and only house. So I'm not going to leave there. But also because I know that my community needs me to be there. They don't need me to be in Whitefish Bay or Cedarburg, even though they wouldn't want me in Cedarburg. But they wouldn't want me there doing that. And I would feel uncomfortable being in Cedarburg covering issues of my community. So I want to give you some examples of how I cover the news. I fight against it by telling good stories, right? This young man is Marlon Dixon, and he's hugging his daughter. Now, to most people, you may not know Marlon Dixon, but Marlon Dixon, y'all walking out on me. I'm teasing. I'm teasing. But Marlon Dixon, real quick, Marlon Dixon was arrested at the age of 14 in 2002 when he participated in a very violent crime. He was living off a 22nd and Brown or something like that. And he hung around a group of young boys who didn't have much direction. There was a man by the name of Charlie Young Jr., a grown man who used to pick on the kids, play with the kids, kind of do stuff like when they were playing football, he would say, let me see the football. He would take the football and throw it down the alley and say, go get it. You know, he would harass the kids. Anyway, one day, Charlie Young Jr. got into a fight with one of the Marlon Dixon's friends, and he ended up pushing this friend down, and Marlon Dixon got involved to protect his friend from this grown man. That turned into a game of cat and mouse where the kids chased Charlie Young Jr. Charlie Young Jr. hid in alleys and stuff like that. He came back. He saw Marlon Dixon sitting on a porch, came up behind Marlon Dixon, sucker punched him, and knocked Marlon Dixon's tooth out. That set off a chain reaction where these kids said, we're going to get him back. So the kids armed themselves with sticks and rocks, and they went looking for Charlie Young Jr. They found Charlie Young Jr. in a home, a duplex, a couple of blocks away, dragged him out of the house and beat this man up on a porch. Marlon Dixon went back on the porch after they beat this man up and hit him a couple more times. And a couple of days later, Charlie Young Jr. died. They gathered up all the young people involved, one as young as 10, the oldest being like 18, 19, or 20 years old, arrested them all. And this story made national news. And oh boy, did Fox love this story. Man, this story made, what's it one, it made Inside Edition. Every big think tank person with a talk show talked about this. They labeled these kids animals, called them super predators, called them all kinds of labels and stuff like this. Trauma was never brought up at the time. Most of the young people involved got 2 years or less. Marlon Dixon got 18 years for his, and 22 years of extended supervision. So his 40 years total. The last time we saw Marlon Dixon, he was led into the courtroom. That was him. That's what he looked like. And 6 months before he was released from prison, 8 months before he was released from prison, the victim's advocate, who represented Charlie Young Jr.'s mom, believed that Marlon was railroaded. She just thought that he wasn't represented well in court by the public defender. The public defender played Marlon Dixon as the ringleader who had a low IQ. Actually, he was actually a victim who was sucker punched by a man who lived in trauma, whose father beat him and all these kind of things, but trauma was not talked about. He ended up getting 18 years and 22 years of extended supervision, but this woman, Vicky Conti, contacted me because she trusted me and said, James, I'm a white woman that lives in Denver. Marlon, I befriended him roughly 2 years ago. I've been sending him books and things like that and telling him, when you get out, things have changed in Milwaukee. And I want to put you in contact with James Causey, who could connect you to resources and things like that. She trusted me enough to do that. I've sent Marlon a letter while he was locked up, snail mail, saying, hey, I'm James Causey. I'm interested in knowing your story. I can help you out once you're released. He wrote me back a 10-page letter. I wrote him back. Our letters turned into phone calls. And by the time he was about to be released, he said, James, can you do me a favor? Can you come to when I'm released? I want you to be there. I did. He had a daughter when he was 14, right? But think back, Milwaukee had the highest teen pregnancy rate in the country back in early 2000s, right? That's her. She's 18 years old. She never saw her father as a free man until that time. So we captured those moments, and I told his story called a Marlon Life Correction, the Marlon Dixon story. And what I wanted to do in this project was really talk about how the last time we saw Marlon Dixon, trauma was not talked about, but this time we know so much more about trauma, and there's so much more we can understand. So I told the story in that way, but the hardest part wasn't talking to Marlon. The hardest part was talking to this young lady right here, who's the sister of the person that they killed, Charlotte Young. This was her at her mother's gravesite. She didn't want to talk to me at first because she said the last time she talked to the media and last time her brothers and anybody talked to the media, that they portrayed her dad or her brother as an alcoholic drunk who deserved to get what he got. So I had to overcome all of that stuff, right? So I get her on the phone. She doesn't want to talk to me. I called her brother. They hung up on me. I was like, she was my only way that I could like tell her side of the story. She said, okay, I'll meet you in Beloit. Now she lives in Arizona, but she was in town for something. She came for somebody's wedding or something like that. And she was going to be in Beloit. She said, I'll meet you in Beloit. I drive all the way up to Beloit. She stood me up. So I get back and I was like, hey, what happened? She said, I don't know if I really want to talk to you. My brothers don't want me to talk to you and stuff like that. But I convinced her to finally open up and talk to me, and she did. And so I was able to get her side of the story. Another person who I got to open up was this man. Who knows who that is? David Crowley. David Crowley shared a story with me that he kept a secret all his life. That's David Crowley when he was involved, when he wanted to be a DJ. But he had a nickname called Dirty Crowley. It was a nickname that they gave him in the streets. And honestly, he lived just blocks away from where that beating took place. He knew Marlon Dixon. Had he not been evicted, he would have been right there beating on Charlie Young Jr. too, because that was his friends. That was his friends. So what I tried to show is like one mistake could change your life. He got evicted. That's the only reason he wasn't there. And he went on to become a county executive. Marlon Dixon had been evicted before, but he was there for the night that they beat this man to death. And guess what? He got 40 years. 40 at the age of 14. But one thing I could say about Crowley, when I told his story, he trusted me enough to share his story because I look like him. He knows that I'm a trusted journalist. David Crowley was sitting on my couch. We're going over the story line by line with his security detail outside our house. But he trusted me enough to share that story. And he says something too on his Facebook page that went something to the effect that, we all have a story, and, he was able to get through his, or something to that effect. And that's one of the greatest compliments I could have received. So I want to take this to what you could do to change this, what I presented to you. First of all, nothing could change this media giant. No one thing. It's too out of hand. It has too much power and control. But there's some things you could do. First of all, you could read and share positive stories on people of color. You could share all of my stories. I would appreciate it if you do that. You could contact the editors at the Journal Sentinel and find out what's their plan on hiring more people of color? What's their plans on hiring more editors of color? How do they support journalists of color? Ask those questions, because our editor needs to hear that. And our editor name is Greg Borowski, or you could also contact Jill Williams and talk to them about the importance of diversity, because that picture that you saw that I showed you from 2019, if that's the picture that represents the community, then we got a lot of work to do. And the last thing I would say is this: it's tough being a journalist of color, especially in this city, and it's tough being me in this city, because I write columns and opinions that often fight off what people say, because I get hundreds of emails weekly that say, James, why do Black people do this? James, why are Black people like this? James, you need to talk to these Black people. James, you ain't nothing but a nigga. Right? They send letters to our house. And sometimes I don't feel like I'm supported. I'm out here by myself trying to do the work, and I take a lot of the bullets and arrows and all those kind of things. So anything that you could do to support a journalist of color, do it, and appreciate them, because typically the only time journalists hear from the public is when we get something wrong. We need to hear from you when we do something right. And now from there, I'll leave it open for questions. Come up here, huh, so they can hear it.
The quote that David Crowley said when he shared this story on his own personal page with people: "I'm not the only one who had potential. There are so many more just like me who get caught all the time, and we have to change that."
So, questions? Yes, ma'am. No, it doesn't. The question was, does it make any difference that some of the other media outlets have more Black journalists than typical local? It makes some difference, but in a big scheme of things, you're still fighting an uphill battle, because I can't tell you how many times I felt like I had to explain Blackness to my white editors sometimes. And what I mean by that is, like, what does this mean? And they would change words. One of my friends who was in town to say his final goodbyes to his father, Jamal Abdul-Alim, was a great journalist for the newspaper, man. He was gritty. He was hardcore. I taught him. So I knew how good he was. But one thing he often said in his writing is that his words were constantly changed by editors who didn't understand what he was trying to convey, especially when it came to people of color. And that became frustrating to him. Now he teaches at the University of Maryland, teaches a journalism class. And Jamal is a great educator. He's a very intelligent man, who I used to edit, and I loved his writing. I made a couple of mistakes with his editing, with some stories that got in the paper that probably shouldn't have got in the paper. But one thing I say is that he was always dedicated to the people he covered. So the short answer is, like, it does make somewhat of a difference, but we need major change to change what this machine that's going on right now. Because guess what? It may be 7.5 hours, 7.5 hours of news that you're taking in right now, but I guarantee if we're here 10 years from now, it's going to be close to 10 hours that we're taking in. We're being, it's almost like a brainwashing that's taking place. And if we rely on just the stuff that we're getting from the news and not getting out meeting real people, then we're setting ourselves up, man. And it's not good. We already have divisions. Yes, ma'am, in the red. You better call my boss and tell him that so I could get a raise. You better call my boss and because don't get me wrong, I love hearing that, but I love money too. So if you told my boss that, I could probably get a raise. Honestly, I don't do this anymore because I've been weathered by this job. This job is beating me up. For a while, I was able to laugh it off and, said people are just racist, people are crazy. But over time, that weathering, it's almost like a house. Think about a house. Like, you can have a beautiful house and live in it for 20 years, and you don't notice the weathering until you take a really good look at it. And you're like, man, the snow and the salt and the rain and the hail kind of beat up my house. I need to touch it up a little bit. Well, a brain doesn't work like that. I've been called the N-word so many times, I cannot even count. People have threatened me. People have threatened my family. No other job will allow their reporters or allow their employees to be called the N-word and not do anything about it. Who does that? Do you think the employees at Apple go into work and then they open up their mail and it's like, you such and such in, you got you in. Who else does that? I'm not being paid enough to take this abuse. I take this abuse for the community because they're not just talking about me. They're talking about people who look like me. And and guess what? It's being reinforced by the media who shapes their minds and make people hate you for no reason. Yes, ma'am. I would write a book, but that's it. I could. I mean, I could. Yeah, I'll call it The Weathering by James Causey. But no, seriously, honestly, I appreciate you guys for inviting me to hear my story, but I just really want to educate you on what's going on because I think a lot of people are unaware of how we're being programmed to hate people who don't look like us. And it may be subtle in some instances, but some of this is done on purpose. And when it's done on purpose like that, and they don't respond to emails when you tell people like, why are you doing this? And they don't even respond back to you and tell you why, you got your answer right there. All right.